The Diocese of Winona-Rochester. The story of the faith here began with the labors of French missionary priests. It was sustained and nurtured by holy bishops, priests, and nuns, and carries on today under the leadership of its current apostle, Bishop John Quinn.
The Lord always is preparing us. We don't know what's in the next chapter, but we do know what God has graciously done for us in the past.
This is the story of the bishops of America, the shepherds of the past and the shepherds of today, who through their callings and ministry carry the church into the future. It's also the story of their parish, their church, the Cathedral. This is The Chair, an exploration of what it means to be an apostle in America. Located on the Zumbro River's South Fork in southeast Minnesota is the city of Rochester, home of the co-cathedral of St. John.
The diocese, as you know, is composed of 20 counties, and many of those counties are rural. Lots of farming. So most of the diocese would be families that are living off the land. So they're close to the earth. We do have places like here, Rochester, that are very urban. So the diocese overall is growing. And I would say the next 10 years for the diocese are bright.
The history of the faith in this region is very rich. While the area has hosted a number of Native American tribes over the centuries, probably the most notable were the Sioux. Translated from the Sioux language, the name Winona itself means oldest daughter or fairest daughter. While initially used to refer to a particular Sioux princess, it has also come to be adopted by the Catholics in the diocese to describe the Blessed Virgin Mary, Winona-Rochester's patroness.
Matthias Loris, who is the Bishop of Dubuque, as with many of the bishops throughout American history, needed priests, and very often they would go back to their native countries, in his case France, to recruit priests, religious sisters, as well as try to raise money to bring back into the country to establish parishes or just fund some of the missionary work that was happening. Bishop Loris, on his journey, recruits a couple of priests, one by the name of Lucien Galtier and the other Augustine Ravoux. He brings these priests, among others, back into the United States. As a result of this, Father Galtier is probably the first missionary priest to have celebrated Mass in the territory of Minnesota. Both Father Galtier and Father Ravoux spent a lot of time evangelizing with the Native American Dakota Sioux community. Father Ravoux learned many of the different dialects of the peoples and actually even created a prayer book. I think a moving instance in the life of Father Ravoux is that he officiates at the last rites of several of the Sioux who were to be executed after a failed uprising in 1862. I think it was a very touching moment for Father Ravoux, because here's this pioneer priest who had really faced a lot of hardship, a lot of suffering, had seen a lot of death in his life. And he was literally, in his diary, he writes, he was moved to tears at the faith of these men who embraced what he believed and he knows and knew in his soul to be true. I think those are the moments in our faith, in the faith of these missionary priests, that just really gives you pause to think, this is so right, this is so worthwhile.
The history of the diocese reflects the remarkable growth that took place in the Catholic population as the railroads and the expansion of farming and the timber industry drove a large number of Catholic immigrants to the region, establishing more permanent settled communities and the development of towns like Winona, with remarkably diverse Catholic population that included Irish, Germans, but also Czechs, Poles, and other European immigrant groups who built churches that helped dot the landscape. One of the churches that's a local landmark is the Basilica of St. Stanislaus, which was built by Polish immigrants who wanted their own parish, separate from the Irish and Germans, who were the first immigrant groups to arrive in the region. It was part of their effort to preserve their own faith and their own language, and to ensure that their children would continue to remain part of a Polish-speaking community and share in the Polish traditions and heritage. The Catholic population in the region grew tremendously in the years leading up to the establishment of the Diocese of Winona in 1889.
At a time when many Catholics settled in urban areas and had to contend with poverty and squalor, Bishop Ireland saw rural life as a solution to those urban ills, and he wanted Catholics to come to Minnesota in order to establish better lives for themselves and for their children.
In 1889, Winona is designated as a diocese, with Bishop Joseph Cotter being its first bishop. He is a close friend of Bishop John Ireland. When Bishop Cotter was installed, Archbishop Ireland gives the homily at the Mass, and he very poignantly draws upon the meaning of the name Winona, which translates as eldest daughter. And in a sense, he's referring to Winona as being the eldest daughter of the Diocese of St. Paul, which Archbishop Ireland was overseeing at the time.
The original cathedral is in Winona. That was founded when the diocese was founded in, 1889. That was the river town. And everybody was moving to Winona. All the logs were coming down the Mississippi, so it was a place for furniture making and factories. And the community was growing. That's where the university is, St. Mary's, and our seminary is there, and of course, our cathedral. So over the years, it's always been an important place.
There was great hopes for this new diocese, and there was probably no better a man to lead with those hopes other than Bishop Cotter. His early appearances throughout the diocese, he almost did this, will we say, listening tour of the diocese, and everywhere that he went, people would stop him. It was almost like a parade in every town. They wanted to meet the new bishop, and he actually took the time with every person, every community, to share his enthusiasm for the creation of this new diocese. So it was really a love festival of the bishop, his people, all pointing towards the divine.
The city of Rochester is perhaps most well known as the home of the Mayo Clinic, which is one of the top healthcare centers in the United States to this day. But what is not well known are the Mayo Clinic's Catholic connections and Catholic roots.
During the Civil War, William and Charles Mayo settled in Rochester, Minnesota, and opened the Mayo Clinic, which is now the #1 ranked hospital in the entire United States. After a vicious tornado tore through the town in 1883, the Sisters of St. Francis, a teaching order led by Mother Alfred Mose, was called in to tend to the wounded. And it was Mose who convinced the Mayos to open a full-fledged hospital in Rochester.
Even though the hospital was founded by the Mayo brothers, who were the doctors who provided the medical care, they had actually contracted with the Sisters of St. Francis, who had established a hospital in Rochester, to build the new Mayo Clinic Hospital. It was the sisters who provided the institutional foundations for the Mayo Clinic and also provided the core of the nursing care that made the work of the Mayo Clinic possible. And the history of the Mayo Clinic is a reminder of the often forgotten and unseen work that Catholic sisters have done to build healthcare institutions in the United States.
The second bishop of the Diocese of Winona was Bishop Patrick Richard Heffron, who was actually born in New York City, but finds his way out west. He was ordained a priest in what then was the Archdiocese of St. Paul, and is appointed bishop in 1910 by Pope Pius X. He was a very interesting man in that he was extraordinarily focused. One could say he did not suffer fools gladly. He had a great vision for the Diocese of Winona, but underlying that vision was an extraordinary focus on the evangelization and the salvation of souls. He once said to his priests, "It's not enough to root out and destroy sin." He said, "You must build and plant." He spent a lot of time creating and building and worked very hard and really built up the diocese into an extraordinary place.
St. Thomas Parish became the provisional cathedral for Winona when the city was established as a diocese in 1889. Before long, the building proved too small as the diocese and the building's congregation continued to grow. By 1950, the building was overflowing, and the Holy See decided to merge St. Thomas with the German parish, St. Joseph's, in order to form the new cathedral parish. Following the merger, the Cathedral of the Sacred Heart was completed in 1952, and this would be the first true cathedral for the diocese. On March 27, 2018, Pope Francis created the new Diocese of Winona-Rochester.
Starting probably 40 years ago, Rochester has been growing, mainly because of Mayo Clinic. It is now the third largest city in the state of Minnesota. So the Holy See decided that we should have a co-cathedral to recognize the fact that eventually there will be 200,000 people here, and it's growing. You see the cranes downtown, new buildings going up, the excitement of people coming. But over the years, the population expanded here, and so the church needs to be present. The church always needs to be in the marketplace. It needs to be at the center of where things are going so that we can proclaim the gospel. And so what it does is it inserts us into the public square.
The Cathedral of St. John the Evangelist was built in 1957. This is a really modern style structure. Ecclesiastical modernism in America looked to develop a vocabulary that was site-specific and local. So rather than taking the precedent from sort of European tradition, the Gothic and Romanesque that grew up out of that local tradition, the modernist ecclesiastical architects looked to develop something that really came from this land. And so the exterior of the building is quarried from local stone. The interior is wood, stone. The stained glass is abstracted. So this is really designed almost to the exclusion of representational artwork. It's looking to the early church, which really focused on abstraction. So the reality is not here in this terrestrial plane, but in another place. Early Christian artwork had an abstracted quality, a flatness, a sense of proportion that was really to let us know that these things are not happening here in this place, but in another realm. The architectural form takes inspiration from sort of the American built landscape, so it has this industrial flavor and is somewhat unexpected in the shape and form of an ecclesiastical building. The altar is in the east of the building. There's a central aisle that one processes towards. There are figurative stations of the cross sculpted out of wood. And so in some ways, the liturgical elements are rather traditional. The design of the Cathedral of St. John the Evangelist is really very open, and so there's a great emphasis on visibility and participation.
The cathedra inside St. John's Co-Cathedral represents Bishop Quinn's authority as the Apostle of Winona-Rochester.
I was born in Detroit, Michigan, and grew up in the Motor City and was part of urban life really throughout my whole time growing up. Mom and Dad now are with the Lord. I grew up in a very loving family. My mom and dad were what you might call salt of the earth. They went to Mass every Sunday. It was very clear in our house, you didn't get to do anything until you went to Mass. My dad was active in the societies, and so was my mom. I had the blessing of going to Catholic schools, so I've always been surrounded by people of deep faith. There's this moment that comes between you and the triune God in your heart, where the Lord begins to place in your heart a desire for something more. And sometimes you're not sure quite what that more is, but you're drawn to prayer, to Mass, and to begin to ask the Lord, what is this, Lord? What do you want of me? And gradually that call, and it's really a call from God, to come and find out, to come to the seminary, to see if God is calling you to share in the priesthood of Jesus Christ.
After years of seminary training, John Quinn was ordained to the priesthood on St. Patrick's Day, March 17, 1972.
Because my dad was George Patrick, and his father was George Patrick, and my brother was George Patrick. So with the three of them, and my dad had died in November and of the previous year. So and when the time came then to move toward an ordination date, it was a Friday night, and it was Feast of St. Patrick, and it was also a way for me to honor my father.
Father Quinn served in the Archdiocese of Detroit in a variety of priestly ministries for the next 30 years. During this time, he gained a deeper awareness into the mystery of suffering when his brother and then his mother passed away a year apart from one another.
So when you have two deaths in a row, and they're all close, it's very difficult. And it makes, you're very unsettled. But that's the time in which faith is your comfort. So that was a challenging time of surrender on my part, complete surrender to God, knowing that they were with the Lord.
On July 7, 2003, Quinn was appointed Auxiliary Bishop of Detroit. In 2008, he was named the next Bishop of Winona-Rochester.
So a call came in. I was teaching at Sacred Heart Seminary. So when I got back, my secretary said to me, the nuncio called you, and he wants you to call him back immediately. He said to me, the Holy Father's appointed you the Bishop of Winona, and now we must set a date for that announcement. And that's it. It was, I think the entire phone call took about 2 minutes maybe. And then you get off the phone, and then of course it says you can't tell anyone. I'll tell you when you can tell someone. And then, you call your spiritual director immediately. For a few days after that, you also think it's not going to happen, or that was a mistake and he's going to call and correct it. But then it's very clear, no, you're going to Winona. So it was a very warm reception. The people were very gracious to me. They didn't know me. I'm trying to get to know them, and they were wonderful. They made me feel at home very quickly, and for that I'll always be grateful.
In the years since becoming bishop, Bishop Quinn has worked hard to bring hope to his people, a virtue that is part of his Episcopal motto.
It was a motto that I didn't know I had to pick one when I was a bishop. I didn't know a lot of things, and they said, no, you have to do that. So what I did was my prayer time over a couple of days, I said, Lord, you've got to pick this, because I don't know what to pick. So as I prayed and went through, I would wait for that moment where the Lord touches your heart. And I think that these years that I've been a bishop have been very much about bringing hope into our church. And the Lord wants the message of hope to be given. Our world is very broken. We see all the violence. And how do we bring hope? We see homelessness. We see immigrants, people trying to find a way. How do we bring hope? Families that are broken and struggling. So I think the Lord wanted it clear to me that these years I am to make sure people know that Christ's victory over sin and death cannot be reversed. His salvation is definitive and complete, and that the foundation of our hope, it's his irreversible work of redemption. Not that, well, things have got to get better because they can't get any worse, but it's founded in that hope. And so even through difficult times, we can rejoice because the victory cannot ever be reversed. Well, I know God's hand is always at work, no matter what it is. When I was an inner city pastor, when I was a teacher at Sacred Heart Major Seminary, when I did spiritual direction there as well as teaching, I really believe everything is in divine providence, including the reason the Lord sent me here. The Lord always is preparing us. We don't know what's in the next chapter, but we do know what God has graciously done for us in the past. All the people who formed me, all of the priests and religious and lay people who really have formed me into who I am now, was all providential. And so that maybe I can be the bishop that they need at this time.